Welcome everybody again. My name is Evan Bronson and I'll be helping with the conversations behind the scenes today. I'd like to encourage all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat box and share any questions you may have in the Q&A box, as we'll be dedicating some time at the end of the session to respond to those questions. We're also live streaming on Facebook Live, as well as recording this session. The recording, as well as all resources shared during the presentation and in the chat box, will be shared with all webinar registrants. Finally, we'll be posting a brief poll towards the end of the conversation and highly encourage you to respond, as this contributes to our commitment to continuously improve. Upcoming sessions include a Funder to Funder co-sponsored by the Patterson Foundation entitled Digital Access and Devices, Scaling the Work Domestically and Internationally with Corporate and Nonprofit Partners. We will also have a Learning Loss Recovery Challenge that day co-sponsored by Whiteboard Advisors. Smart ESSER investments, leveraging EdTech for equitable learning acceleration. And the following week, we'll have a partner webinar co-sponsored by the Tremaine Foundation entitled Learning to Read, Applying the Universal Design for Learning. We hope that you can register and enjoy those events as well. Now, I would like to introduce you to Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, Becky Miles-Polka. Enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Evan, and hello and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for this GLR Learning Tuesday webinar, Closing the Gap, Improving Attendance for Our Youngest Learners. And this webinar is co-sponsored by Attendance Works. And I do believe that we have a record number of people registered for this webinar today. Over 900 people have registered, and it just goes to show how very important this issue is to all of us. Chronic absence has skyrocketed as a result of the pandemic, and schools across the nation are grappling with strategies to reduce these numbers and ensure that children are back in school. This is especially critical for our youngest learners, as you will hear today. We have a stellar panel and the very best moderator for this conversation, Hetty Chang. Hetty is the founder and executive director of Attendance Works, a national and state level initiative aimed at advancing student success by addressing chronic absence. Attendance Works has been our close-in partner with the campaign since its launch, and Hetty's contributions have been many. She is one of the most passionate and committed leaders I know, and she's deeply committed to promoting two-generation solutions to achieve a more just and equitable society. And one highlight in 2013, Hetty was named by the White House as a champion for change for her commitment to furthering African-American education. Hetty, thank you for joining us, for organizing our conversation today. And I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Becky. It is my privilege to both be a partner for such a long time with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and it is never more apparent that looking at chronic absence is part of a comprehensive approach to making sure that kids will have experienced early successes is just more important than ever. And it is my pleasure to be able to be part of this panel. Let's go to the next slide. I know we have lots of folks, don't know how much folks know about chronic absence, so I'm going to just do a little bit of level setting. What I mean by chronic absence is that's missing 10% or more of the school year. So that's 2 days in the first month, 4 days in the second month, 6 days in the third month of school. By the end of an entire school year, you're talking about 18 days. That includes excused absences, unexcused suspensions, any reason a child isn't there in the classroom to benefit from the learning experiences, the connections to peers, all the reasons why kids should be in school. And it's different from truancy, which typically only refers to unexcused absences, and average daily attendance, which usually looks at how many students typically show up to school any day. And both those figures can mask high levels of chronic absence. Next slide, please. As Becky mentioned, we have an incredible challenge. We think that now at the end of last year, chronic absence has skyrocketed. It is double the levels prior to the pandemic. we're starting to see data that shows it's continuing to be high. So even though we thought, well, with the pandemic not being so significant, we would start to see kids to come back to school in the ways that were happening in, let's say, 1819, that is just not quite the case. And we're going to have some real intentional strategies for making sure our youngest learners are in school and benefiting from those opportunities to learn. Okay, next slide. I thought I would give you a snapshot of what I mean by high levels of chronic absence in the early grades and the older grades and how it's expanded. This is actually a snapshot from Ohio. So you can see in kindergarten, chronic absence went from 17% to 31%. And you can see the trends. High levels gets a little better and then it goes higher again. Next slide. This is data from California that was just released. Where in California, we're seeing 40% of our kindergartners chronically absent at the end of last year. Next slide. And when you break that out by ethnicity, it's even more troubling. Over 50% of our African-American young learners, kindergartners, over 50% of our Native American kindergartners, almost 50% of our Hispanic or Latino kindergartners, and almost 60% of our Pacific Islander students. These are such troubling numbers because we know that kindergarten chronic absence left unaddressed can predict kids not reading at grade level by the end of third grade. Next slide. And this is the data from Connecticut. Connecticut is a state that has so committed itself to timely data, and they actually collect data every month. So you can actually look at data through the end of November. That blue line is last year. So they had about 27.5% of their kindergartners chronically absent last year. And it's a little over 30%, 33% at the end of November this year. So Connecticut has some really amazing supports and interventions in place. It speaks to the challenges that we're facing as students are returning back to school, and we've had 3 years of disruptive learning. Next slide, please. These high levels and continued high levels of chronic absence really reflect an erosion in the positive conditions of learning that help students and families want to be in school, feel comfortable being in school, and make sure there aren't barriers to being in school. So we know kids and families are more likely to come to school when they feel physically and emotionally healthy and safe, when they feel a sense of belonging, connection, and support, when they feel academic challenge and engagement, and when they're surrounded by adults and students with well-being and emotional competence. And yet we know that these past few years have really challenged all of these dimensions. Certainly, illness is at all-time high. Last year, kids were back in school, but parents were back, families weren't in school. So that sense of connection, belonging has been disrupted. The incredible levels of staffing challenges that we faced. So what this means, if we go to the next slide, is that we are really going to have to think about how do we understand and unpack what's keeping kids from getting in school? How are we going to forge deep partnerships to make sure we can address those barriers and put in place those positive learning conditions? This is not just what can happen within schools' walls and with school staff. This is about partnerships with public agencies, with community organizations, with early childhood providers. This is going to take a year-round, all hands on deck approach that makes sure students and their families are engaged and learning in multiple settings so they are comfortable and confident in school and have that opportunity to thrive and succeed. Next slide, please. So it is my privilege that I can introduce our panelists who will help us understand both what are these challenges and what can we do? What have we learned both before the pandemic and during the pandemic about how we can make sure our youngest learners have this opportunity to succeed so we can close the equity gap, which has unfortunately been even further exacerbated during these difficult times. So we have a number of presenters joining us from really diverse, different kinds of perspectives. The first is Elliot Atisha, who is a new senior fellow for health for Attendance Works. He's a pediatrician who was the chief medical officer for the Detroit Public Schools, which is a major urban district located in the central part of the country, 53,000 students, predominantly African-American, has certainly dealt with huge economic challenges. And what I also really appreciate about Elliot is he's been an incredible thought partner with me, particularly when he served with the American Academy of Pediatrics and helped to be a co-author of their attendance policy statement. So in addition to Elliot, we're going to be joined by Erica Forti. She is the superintendent of East Haven, which by contrast with Detroit is a much smaller school district serving just about 3,100 students, mostly white and Hispanic, but then a mix of other students. What I've so appreciated about Erica, who I've known now for a number of years, is her ability to rally her entire community together to figure out how do they reach out to families, how does her school staff reach out, connect with families and students, and make sure that they are partnering with them to get back to school, taking data-informed action, combined with deep relationship building. Our third speaker, member of our panelists, is Assistant Superintendent Elena Hill. She is the Assistant Superintendent for Early Learning with the Dallas Independent School District. She is a longtime advocate for young children, where she works to make sure that in her district, there are quality learning environments for children, and there are deep connections to the community stakeholders who can help empower their families to be their children's best first teachers. Dallas, again, another different situation here, is a huge district with 145,000 students, of which nearly 70% are Hispanic or Latino, and another 1% are African American. And last but not least, we're joined by Tracy Hill, who is the Executive Director for Family and Community Engagement with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District in Cleveland, Ohio. Like Elena, Tracy is just so deeply committed to taking a transformative approach to family and community engagement. I so appreciate her willingness to look at that perspective, not only from what helps families, but what helps the folks who are in school systems change how they interact, how they support families, how they take a trauma-informed approach to building relationships. And located again in the middle of the country, Cleveland serves around 36,000 students, about 65% are African-American, 17% are Hispanic, the remainder are mixed, and Cleveland has a long, deep history of really working on the attendance issue under the leadership of CEO Eric Gordon and Lori Hobson, who is their director of attendance. What I will comment on is this panel, if you notice, none of them are the attendance directors. They're from the other parts of school districts, the leadership, the health, the early learning, the family engagement. And that's because attendance isn't something that you improve by taking a sort of sole focus just on attendance. It's by paying attention to all these other dimensions of how schools operate that we can make a difference. So with that, I would like to have my panelists all join me. And actually, we're going to start though with Erica. Erica, I'd like you to start the conversation out by talking about what you see as some of the one or two top challenges facing our youngest learners and causing them to miss school. And then say a little bit about how the challenges maybe facing our youngest learners looks different than students who are older.
Yeah, thank you, Hetty. So our initial challenge has been with families feeling more comfortable with taking their children out of school for longer periods of time to vacation or to visit family or to return to their country of origin. And the challenge is greater now as we're experiencing families leaving for longer periods of time, more than one time during the school year. So we're working on trying to change parents' perception that their child is fully learning if, they're given a packet of work to complete or finishing all of the work posted in the Google Classroom. We all know that not being present in school has more significant implications for our youngest learners as they're missing that differentiated scaffolded instruction from their teacher that contain the key elements embedded in that very valuable process of learning, like productive struggle and perseverance. So we're trying to work with our parents and ensuring that they know and understand that just doing the work and finishing it in Google Classroom is not enough. These experiences that they have in the classroom are a critical part of their learning, especially for our youngest learners, because it helps to develop those critical skills and attributes of learning that through the teacher's instructions, that's really critical to those foundational skills and concepts. And students need that. It is so important prior to completing the work and/or the independent practice that follows. And all of those foundational components of developing our earliest learners, we think is a little different than could be potentially at the older level where kids are a little bit more self-directed, engage in different types of platforms that also may contain instructional components to accompany the work as well. So that has been
Erica, let me just clarify. So it's almost like when COVID happened and those first couple months, we shifted to virtual kinds of learning and sending packets home. And then I know you all were committed in Connecticut to getting kids back in person, but you still had to have virtual options because so many people were fearful of catching COVID if they came into schools, that there's almost like a lasting perception that, oh, that virtual, that online learning, that's okay, that's good enough. And they don't fully understand how learning really requires being around other kids and in the classroom. I feel like I'm hearing that is
Yes.
part of one of the impacts of the pandemic that you're struggling with now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not just about completing the work. There's so much more that goes on in the classroom relative to the interactions with students in their classroom, the instruction, that whole process of learning and productive struggle and helping kids gently, overcome some of those challenges and the perseverance and working through some of those problems and also all the social aspects that come with that. So helping to change that perception and getting parents to understand the importance of coming into a school building every day is probably more important than actually completing all of the work and the assignments in the Google Classroom or in the packet that they request prior to leaving, for vacation or to visit family.
Thank you. Elena, please join us here and tell us, what would you add? How does this connect to the challenges that you're seeing in Dallas?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I was listening very closely because I do share some of the same sentiments with just the lack of routines being there for our youngest children. But something else that we're noticing is how families are still impacted by the pandemic today. And so many of our families are still in crisis. And so whether that is employment crisis or just health crisis in the family, and for reasons that not because parents don't care, but many times parents will deprioritize sending their youngest children to school when there's something going on at home. And so for us, building those very, very strong connections with families is super important so we can ensure that our youngest children are present as much as possible.
Sort of like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I don't have housing, I don't have health, I don't have a car. It's not even deprioritizing. It's like you just don't have the capacity to make getting to school the top priority because you're so consumed by these deep challenges. And then if you add to that thinking that, well, maybe if I just fill in the homework packet, we'll be okay.
Yeah.
It kind of even makes that even worse.
That's true. And nothing truly replaces the foundational skills that children learn when they come to school as young as 3 and 4 and 5 years old. And so it's super important that our kids are engaged as much as possible.
Do you see any particular challenges facing immigrant families or families for whom English is not their home language?
We do. We are starting to see, when we look across our student groups, we are seeing that chronic absenteeism is really showing up the most for our African-American as well as our Latinx students. And then when we look at their specific family needs, many times, I think Erica said it as well, just the family's comfort level with school and trust may be lacking simply because of special situations that are going with the family. Families may be just scared to just release their kids to the school system, whether that's health-wise or just worried about other things. But we are starting to see some of that, which is why a little bit later, I'll talk about some of the things that we're doing to really build the family support systems.
All right, thank you. I know we're going to stick a bit on this focus on challenges, and we will, I promise the audience, come back to what helps to address these things. Tracy, what would you add from Cleveland's experience?
Well, I would say that, Cleveland was like ground zero for COVID. We had very high infection rates, a lot of deaths. So I think one of the challenges that we face is the disruption of the family structure. In many instances, we have grandparents taking care of children, other family members taking care of children. Remember that Cleveland has, I think, the highest rate of childhood poverty in the nation. So I think those disruptions in the family structure and supports really did impact our youngest learners. I think also the break in routine, Cleveland did a massive expansion of preschool programming in all of our pre-K to 8 buildings. So we have a pre-Ks in all of our buildings, but we saw a drop off in enrollment over the last, well, of course, during COVID, but even when we came back to full-time in person, our preschool enrollment continued to drop. And when you think about kindergarten readiness, those kids who have not had a preschool experience tend to struggle. When they come to school, they're further behind their peers, and they haven't had that exposure to the structure and routines and rituals of a classroom. So that sometimes when a child is ill, or in many instances we see when there's a family member who's ill, either with COVID or some other condition, parents or the caregivers tend to keep all the kids home for fear of spreading the illness, or because they are just not able to get one of their 3 kids to school. Family health is more important. And as Elena touched on, when you have multiple needs in terms of housing and food and transportation, sometimes getting out the door and getting kids to school is the last priority. And we tend to try not to judge our families on that, and try to offer as many supports as possible.
Tracy, can you say just a word about how do these struggles, the challenges facing the youngest learners differ than what you might be seeing among your older kids?
Yeah, well, our attendance rates for our kindergarten and unfortunately our high school students are comparable. We're seeing high levels of chronic absenteeism. In the case of our older students, what we've seen is that many of them have actually become contributors to the household income. They're out there working. And when we saw the increase in minimum wage and the need for employers to have additions to their workforce, because we all know that many of our employers just couldn't get the people that they wanted, they raised the actually hour rates. And now we have a lot of teens who are actually employed, gainfully employed, and are contributing to their household income. And in some instances, they are the only breadwinner of the family. So that is one of the challenges that we're facing, is go to school or work to help out the family.
Yeah. Well, we've also seen in many, or heard in many places, older kids are taking on caregiving responsibilities.
That as well.
Younger kids,
Yes.
if their parents are working, or other members. And then they become sort of who we have to also how do you manage getting to high school and getting your youngest sibling to kindergarten? Could be even a dual challenge.
Yeah.
Elliot, Tracy talked a lot about health-related challenges. Help us better understand what's happening around health and how is that affecting attendance?
Sure. Thanks, Hetty. First, I want to find out how we steal Tracy and bring her to Detroit. Yeah, so in terms of health, both physical and behavioral health are leading contributors to missing school. And COVID has really only exacerbated many of these issues. Due to existing challenges and barriers to getting care, such as transportation or families living in recognized health professional shortage areas, many of these health issues go unaddressed, not only leading to missed school days, but also to poor health outcomes. For example, you have children with chronic health issues are especially prone to missing school, and asthma alone contributes to 14 million missed school days annually. That doesn't include all those days that a child is up coughing all night due to their asthma, but still somehow makes it to school and now can't stay awake or focused. Dental caries, the most common chronic disease of childhood, is a major contributor to the school, to the learning environment. But it's also a preventable issue. Children with poor oral health are nearly 3 times more likely to miss school than a child without dental issues. And so the earlier we intervene, the better the outcomes.
Well, and Elliot, I think what you're saying is that these chronic health issues existed before the pandemic, but because of the shortages, because of people even maybe being fearful about going to a health appointment during the pandemic, they're even worse. So they're not even COVID related. They're not COVID itself, but that these chronic health issues may even be having more of an impact than they ever did before.
Absolutely. And in many cases, schools are a place where kids may get specific services. And so being away from the school environment really limited access to those resources, whether it's behavioral health support, whether it's a nurse who was helping to coordinate your care, whether it was a screening for a specific health issue. But what if COVID did anything is it brought attention to the importance of addressing these issues. And it especially brought attention to emotional and behavioral health issues. Children really, because of COVID, children really felt isolated due to the remote learning. Maybe they lost a family member, maybe they lost a teacher to COVID. And when you look at statistics, nearly 20% of children experience a behavioral health problem during their school year. Nearly 80% of those kids, due to both stigma and barriers around access, don't receive the necessary treatment. And then what happens is unaddressed behavioral health problems impact the learning environment. They lead to struggles with relationships, schoolwork, attendance, and eventually place students at increased risk for dropout.
Elliot, there's also a lot of comments in the chat I'm seeing reflected that they're talking about there's not just kids' health, it's maternal health. And I've always thought that chronic absence, even before the pandemic, sometimes maternal depression, maternal anxiety, it gets awfully hard when you're, struggling as a mom or a parent to get your kid to school regularly. So I wonder, has the pandemic also affected the ability of families to get access to health and mental health supports so they can actually be there to get their kid to school?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about engaging with students, we're not just engaging the student alone. We need to make sure we're screening for specific issues that may be affecting the family. Is there housing insecurity? Is there food insecurity? Are there challenges with just getting your child to school? And that's when having the right resources and supports in place can help those families to overcome those challenges. We know that kids who face housing insecurity issues are much more likely, because they're moving from school to school to school, are much more likely to miss school and to not be able to show up. And then what it also does when you're moving from school to school to school is it makes it difficult for you to become engaged, to develop important relationships, which can eventually impact your learning environment.
So we're starting to get into strategies and solutions, Elliot. So what strategies have you found to be effective in addressing both the health, the behavioral health, the emotional health of kids and making sure they can come to school?
Yeah, this is so important, and really a place where we can make a tremendous impact on creating the healthy learning environment that our kids deserve. One key area is guidance on when a child should or shouldn't come to school. And schools can really work. It needs to be, first of all, the most important piece is that it needs to be consistent. And schools can work with local and state health departments to develop such messaging. And an important piece to this also is creating professional development for staff so that they're aware of the messaging and have a clear understanding. And then making sure that that messaging is available in appropriate translations. And it's really important here that when this material is translated, that it's done by professionals so that messaging doesn't get lost in translation.
Elliot, can I just stick with this? Because I just think about with young learners and wondering what you're seeing about that. I know that even when my own kid was little, they had anxiety. And when they had anxiety, they would have a stomach ache or a headache. And I remember actually my early childhood provider actually said to me, hey, I think your child's having a lot of anxiety, and worked with me so that I didn't keep them home, but I sent them regularly to school because routine can be part of that strategy. How do we make sure that families know when is my kid actually sick and I should keep them home because it's contagious or COVID? And how do I know when to send them to school? Because that's actually helping them develop this critical routine that they need for their social emotional health.
Yeah, engaging parents is so important, and making sure that messaging is available. And not only that, when you have parents coming to school, engaging them at parent meetings, working with them to ensure that they have a clear understanding on why you shouldn't keep your child at home. And then also making sure that they're aware of the resources that can support their children to bring them into school. And many parents may not know that there's a school nurse. They may not know that there's a social worker. They may not know that there's a school-based health center at the school. And if parents are aware of what each of those individuals can offer, then they're more likely to take advantage of those services. And the role that school can play, in addition to having those services available, is to screen for some of those issues, especially behavioral health issues. And once you identify what those issues are, then you can connect the children to appropriate resources. And there really needs to be a multi-tier system approach in place, making sure that you're raising awareness, and then that you're able to connect kids to the appropriate supports and resources, whether it's through group therapy, whether it's individual therapy, intensive therapy, whatever it takes to help that child and that family overcome those issues and create that healthy learning environment that they deserve.
Thank you so much, Elliot. I'm going to turn to Tracy now and ask her, what are some of the strategies that you found to, wait, do you want to speak to this last slide and then we'll do that, Elliot?
Yeah, thank you, Hetty. This slide is so important because when we talk about creating an important environment, a healthy learning environment for our kids, we really need to focus on the whole child. And when you look at the whole school, whole community, whole child model, which is the diagram on the right, you can see that physical and mental health are included, right? But it's not just those two. You also have parent engagement, you have employee wellness, you have the physical environment. And unless you really focus on each of these components, your impact is going to be limited. So we need to make sure that we have the appropriate supports and resources, but that we're also addressing each of these items. You know, employee wellness is just one example. you have all of these kids who are bringing different issues to school, and now those teachers are listening to it, they're taking it in, it's taking a toll on them, they're trying to support these kids as much as they can, but then it impacts their teaching environment. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of our staff so that they can take care of our kids.
Thank you so much. All right. So Tracy, I would love, I know, again, Cleveland has been so heavily hard hit, but I also know you have a long history of effective work on attendance. So talk to us about what you're seeing and what you're seeing still works even in the face of the pandemic.
Yes, even in the face of the pandemic, we have a multi-pronged strategy. As Elliot talked about, the whole child learning, really thinking about using tiered levels of supports, not only for our scholars, our children, but also for our families. I just wanted to share some data with you. Right now, our current kindergarten attendance rate is 82%. Prior to the pandemic, we had a very successful attendance campaign, and we were seeing numbers in the 90s and upper 90s in terms of attendance. And as you can see, we've fallen off. Our chronically absent kindergarten students are at 60%, meaning that they've missed right now in February 18 or more days of school. And some of the interventions that we've put in place, we are a Say Yes city. So every one of our schools, all 105 of our schools, have a full-time Say Yes family support specialist. And these are typically licensed social workers and practitioners who provide an array of wraparound services to family, from mental health services to connecting them with food banks, assisting with rental assistance, utilities, by using what we call the post-secondary planning system, where we've actually put in a database, all of the different providers in Cleveland and in Cuyahoga County, over 10,000 providers who can provide anything from glasses, hearing screenings, counseling services, food support. We initiated our parent ambassadors in school year 21-22, where we have part-time parent ambassadors in our schools. And these are actually parents of students in those schools who work part-time to build networks of families. We know that with COVID, there was a lot of alienation. So how is it that we bring parents together to form these natural networks of support to help them in terms of, you know, just having someone talk to, someone to reach out, someone who's going through the same experiences that they are and the challenges. But we adopted the Parent Cafe, which is out of Building Strong Families and focuses on building family resiliency. So our parent ambassadors actually hold these parent cafes monthly and sometimes weekly, depending on the school. Our staff, we have our attendance liaisons, which is a bullet down, as well as our teachers, family support specialists and parent ambassadors do wellness checks. So when we notice that a student is missing multiple days of school, instead of calling and saying, you know, why isn't your kid in school? It's now, how's everything going? Is everything okay? What types of supports do you need? Do you need someone to talk to? And even doing home visits in some instances. We have relaunched our nationally acclaimed attendance campaign and with targeted messaging, incentives for students in classrooms who have of good attendance, and interventions for all students, whether they're tier 1 strategies for all students, tier 2 or tier 3. And again, all of this is really data driven when we're looking at our attendance by grade level, by school, and then using an array of different strategies to incentivize attendance. And not only for those students who are attending like perfect attendance, I don't even know if that exists anymore, but students who are making an effort and who are showing improved attendance. Again, we do have our attendance liaisons with our attendance office under the leadership of Lori Hobson, our director of attendance. And I think the biggest thing is shifting from the punitive approach where, you know, you send the legal letters to families. We still do that in some instances, but really thinking about how is it that we wrap services and support supports around families who are struggling, to remove some of those, to help with some of the challenges that they're facing, not only in terms of physical well-being, but also mental health. We have restorative practice. Many of our educators, I think all of them have been trained in restorative practice. We have mental health agencies. We have a mental health agency assigned to every school. So we have counselors from mental health agencies in our schools to not only provide support to our students, but to the parents as well. And one of the last strategies that we've used is we've launched Everyday Labs. And this is a web-based program that's connected to our Power School, which is our student information system that tracks student attendance data and then allows for school teams to really look at that data, dig deep into that data, and again, offer those targeted supports to our scholars.
So thank you so much, Tracy. I do think about one of the challenges. We worked with Cleveland before, where you were able to kind of reduce chronic absence from, I think, to much lower levels. And now you're seeing this extraordinary scale. And I'm seeing some of that is when you have a really a community with deep poverty. This doesn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't.
Addressing those issues is going to require investment and support over time. I don't know if in a sentence or two, and then I'm going to turn to some of our next speakers. Could you say, how do you know a strategy is working, given that it's, this is a pretty challenging time to make a difference? How do you assess if those strategies are starting to work?
Well, again, we are very data-driven in Cleveland. So just monitoring attendance data. And again, we look at classrooms, we look at grade levels. So when we see that there's an improvement in the data, then we know that specific strategies are working. Again, thinking about that targeted messaging, as I said, we just launched our Everyday Labs. And for those of you who don't know Everyday Labs, it is based on brain science. So there's a lot of really positive messaging. You can do it, but it also offers like 24/7 support in terms of helping families with interventions. So just always looking at data. And again, it's by classroom, by school, and again, by grade level. And just seeing those improvements. And they will be gradual. There's no magic bullet here.
Thank you so much. So I want to turn to you, Erica, and we get to look in a much more small, I think we're one slide off. Or is that the right one?
Yes, that's.
Oh, that is. Sorry about that. Next slide. So Erica, and you're working in by contrast, a much smaller environment where you're able to kind of focus on your kids and families. What are you seeing that really helps to improve attendance?
So the strategies I chose to share today come directly from the school and classroom level. And we find success with the ones that really focus on building relationships, responding to student social and emotional needs, as well as their well-being, and connecting with families in a really personalized manner. So this first strategy, the morning quick check, is a strategy we used at an elementary level to build stronger relationships and deeper connections with our students. It allows our teachers and our adults to get a pulse on how students are entering school each day. And so when students arrive in their classroom, they take a quick check Google survey to self-assess how they're feeling and share anything that they would like their teacher to know. And then the teacher uses sort of their own avatar, as you can see pictured here. This is Miss Preet from Tuttle School at grade 3, to showcase these emotions and help personalize it for students. The information the teachers get from the quick check help them make informed decisions for the day about a potential topic they can run with a restorative circle. They may use the information to sort of assess their students' readiness for learning that day. They also use the information to identify those individual students they need to connect with individually who are coming in with something, really heavy in their backpack per se. And then also teachers will use it to sort of say, what specific social emotional learning skills do I need to naturally integrate throughout the day based on how my kids and my students are coming in? And this strategy was initially used at Tuttle School by a grade 3 team based on their work with the principal and the SEL coach. They conducted a post SEL survey after engaging in this morning quick check with grade 3 students for 4 months. And as you can see, the grade 3 data shows positive growth across all the Panorama SEL indicators, with the greatest improvement made in grade 3 students' ability to regulate their emotions. And that's huge. That's a big executive functioning skill and sets the stage for learning throughout the day.
Hey, Erica, were you able to make any connections between this and improved attendance as well?
Yeah, so Tuttle School had the best attendance out of any school last year. Grade 3 was a big contributor to that, but they were only at 14% chronic absenteeism rate last year, where all of our other schools were in the low to high 20s.
Wow.
Yeah. So
and I think you were going to share another strategy. So let's go on to that one.
Sure. So the next strategy is more of a tier 3 strategy, and it's used to strengthen family connections and is super personalized in nature. Our district attendance team is part of this work, but it involves us making personalized individual calls to all incoming parents of kindergarten students to share important information around attending school regularly. And also allows parents the opportunity to ask us any questions or share any feedback with us relative to the transition program we have in place. We also use these personalized calls for kids who may not be chronically absent, but are missing sort of more days than they typically would, just to sort of inform parents, ask them if there's any resources or supports that they need to help them. And also, again, ask them for their input as to why their students are missing school and what we can do to help support getting their kids to school every day. We come from a very positive, productive place. There's no set script, but the team does come together to talk about their conversations and how they went with families. So we're reflective about what we're saying and how we're saying it and how we're presenting it. We find that, letters and general information is great, but this personal connection with families and taking the time to speak with them on the phone often ends up in a thank you and, some sort of outcome that increases their kids' attendance rate.
Erica, there's a question in the chat, and I'm just going to do a little bit of this. They were asking, what are the skills, qualifications, training for the folks who are doing these calls?
So most of them are teachers at the building level, and we do have general guidelines, but it's basically classroom teachers. And I put some information in a further question about teacher burnout that I'll connect later on, but it's basically individuals and staff from the school making these calls. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I'm going to shift over to Elena, because I know Elena has also really emphasized connecting and partnering with families. So tell us about your strategies that you're using to connect to families so you can improve attendance.
Sure thing. So like many have said on this call so far today, just the strengthening of parent connections is super important, especially when we talk about our earliest learners. And so we have really ramped up our home visiting programs and our efforts here in Dallas ISD. One of them is through what we're calling home-to-home visits. And so that's where our teachers, or it could be a paraprofessional on campus, actually make a home visit to the family's actual home or a virtual visit. And so this is a strategy that we're using to build empathy among teachers and our students, and to build trust between our families and our schools. Many times kids are super excited to be able to have their teacher over, or at least, their teacher can come see their front yard or where they play, or the playground that they go to. So that's something that we are seeing some good relationship building, which again is helping kids want to come to school. The second home visiting strategy is our HIPPY program. And so Dallas ISD is just fortunate to be able to run the HIPPY program, which is the home instruction for parents of preschool youngsters. And that is using an evidence-based curriculum. And so we have home instructors that go into the house with the curriculum in hand, and they teach parents strategies of how to truly become their child's best first teacher. And you can see here on the screen some just of the collateral and flyers that we use just to serve the parents and just get them excited about school. And then of course their kids get excited about school as well. Something else we've done, and it's much like Tracy spoke about, is using a proactive approach. And so, of course, truancy is truancy, and it's there. And I think it has a place, for attendance. But we really want to rely on being proactive and being positive instead of punitive. And so we have also partnered with Everyday Labs, who is responsible for sending out nudges by text message or letters. And the letters are super friendly. They're personalized per student. They let the family know, hey, Elena has missed 6 days compared to her peers who have missed 2. And so that just gets the parents' attention in a different way. And these are fully customizable. So we're able to customize these for young parents of younger learners, and then connect them to resources at the school level. Something positive that we have seen from this particular mode of communication is that it captures a lot of other things that maybe families are not reporting to the school. So maybe they're reporting to through this mechanism that maybe their child feels scared at school, or maybe their child may be experiencing some bullying. And so we're truly able to connect families with resources that they may not have been able to do outside of this.
And Elena, this is also similar to is this Everyday Labs also?
Yes.
So when Tracy was talking about Everyday Labs as a strategy, and folks were wondering a little bit about what that looks like, this is actually being used in both districts. So I just thought I would allow that to be clear.
Yes. Yeah, and so, but the last one is truly the connection to families. So again, it's the connection of resources, because that is really how we're going to improve attendance in schools, is to make sure that our parents have what they need so they can feel strong and feel confident in us as the school system to educate their children. And so some of that is just very, very simple strategies of just listening to families, understanding what their needs are, and then as necessary to refer them to get medical attention, mental health attention, housing, transportation, food insecurities, whatever the family is experiencing. I definitely want to close that gap for them so they can not worry about that and just get their children in school.
It's interesting. I think when I think about your strategies, you're doing one which is highly personalized, these home visits, and another which is almost trying to use technology, use a centralized call so that you can reach as many folks as possible, and maybe possibly even create more time for that more highly personalized home visiting approach. Is that part of the thinking here?
That's exactly right. The other thing about Everyday Labs is we, as a district, we chose to also do the text messaging option. And so that's really appealing to some of our parents now. It's easier for us to receive text messages than it is for, a letter to come home with a child. And so we're really having like real-time interaction time with parents. And so you're exactly right. We're wanting to really meet the parents where they are, because the goal is just to have kids in school. And it's not a you're in trouble. No one's wagging their finger. We're not judging parents. We're just reiterating the importance of having their children in school, especially the young children.
Great. I would actually like to invite all of our panelists to be on here and ask a few questions where we won't so much use slides, but we'll do this through interaction among all of us. And I'd also, we'll use this as an opportunity to get into some of the Q&A coming in. But let me ask first, so a lot of this work, and I'm thinking, Erica, you know, your response was who's making those phone calls, but also even the work of using some of the strategies for checking on kids' wellness and well-being. That's all involving staff at schools. How do you engage staff? This has been a tough 3 years for school staff. How do you get them involved, and how do you engage them and make them part of this?
So it has been a really tough 3 years, and they're tired and the work is really exhausting. So we're trying to keep them involved by providing more opportunities for them to collaborate and work together with, during their free periods, to develop proactive and preventative measures or strategies that then ultimately result in alleviating some of the workload and the challenges that they're experiencing. So, for example, it's really hard for teachers when kids are out multiple times, a number of kids in their classroom over the course of the weeks, as you know, the school year is progressing, and trying to remember who missed their guided reading group and who still hasn't finished this project, and who do I need to get to for assessment testing. So we're asking our staff to take a proactive approach and reach out to families if a kid's been absent for a day, and just check in a very positive, proactive way, like, hey, we missed your child today. We want to check in, make sure everything's okay, and encourage them to come back the next day, provided that they're well enough to do so, or figure out what's going on and what kind of resources we can immediately enact or employ to help support the family in getting the child back to school. That, in essence, then reduces them having to continually manage who's been absent and who they haven't seen in small groups and things of that nature. So that's one sort of proactive approach that we've been using. Also, struggling with managing behaviors that sometimes then result in kids missing schools for whatever reason. That quick check-in is so critical, because it allows the kid to name their feeling, the teacher to identify that, and then make an immediate connection with that child to help let them know that we understand where they are, and be sensitive to that, and reset or find a different on-ramp for the day. And that,
so basically you're it sounds like you're doing the ounce of prevention strategy. If we invest up front, it's going to make your life easier later, and helping teachers experience that. Elena or Tracy, one of you can raise your hand or unmute. Maybe, so let me start with Elena. What would you add to this in terms of how do you get staff bought in and supported?
Well, first we have to make the connection between the relationship piece and how a student is going to show up in school. And I often joke, because I'm in early childhood, it's obvious that our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds do not drive themselves to school. And so, of course, the parent is an important part in that. And so we have to make sure that the parent is trusting with us, and just really show the teacher that once they get that trust and that relationship, that it's really going to help and open a lot of doors. As a former kindergarten teacher, I can speak personally to that I just got invited to a former student turned 30, and I got invited to his birthday party. So it really speaks to the relationships that are built and just the trust. Another thing that we do is for our teachers is that we provide pay, like per home visit. We will compensate them to do that. Teachers would do it for free, for sure. And we're just happy that we're able to help help show them that this is important to us, as important as to them, and just give them some compensation, because they do this after work or sometimes even on the weekends.
Tracy, I'm going to actually shift this question. I want to think about, because I know you have a ton of community partners. Who are particularly important community partners for engaging families with our youngest learners?
Oh my God, we have so many. Okay, so I think definitely partnerships that focus on literacy, like some of the other states, we have the Imagination Library. So this is where families sign up to get free books delivered to their homes, and this is courtesy of Dolly Parton. We also have in our city right now, under our new mayor, Mayor Bibb, a Cleveland Reads campaign that we recently launched in December, where we are asking families to read 1 million books over the next year, 1 million words. So again, focusing on early literacy. And then looking at some of our early literacy partners like the Literacy Cooperative, who do the Spark program, which entails doing home visits with pre-K families and really focusing on, parents as the child's first teacher in those foundational skills, but also thinking about how to effectively transition your child to school. I have a long list of partners, and I know some of them are on the
Tracy,
call.
do you partner between your school and early childhood programs?
Yes, actually I do. They're right down the hall from my office. So we have a very strong partnership with our early childhood program, which is pre-K to 3. And we actually do professional development for the pre-K and kindergarten teachers. They have monthly professional development, and we are often asked to come and talk about, as Elena said, how do you build those relationships of trust? How do you break down those barriers where a family might be a little hesitant, or because of their past experiences, not really trusting what's going on with the schools. And again, just working again with our teachers union around professional learning opportunities, and utilizing their expertise in terms of reaching out to families. We also did have our teachers engage in home visits, visiting those families of students who didn't show up. But also we know that the teachers are they're the front line. They're the ones who have those relationships and those opportunities to build that connection with families. So again, thinking about how is it that we can be a support to them, and also offering additional compensation in our CBA, which is our collective bargaining agreement. Teachers have the opportunity, they get paid for 12 hours of community engagement. And as I said, you have to recognize that our teachers have done a phenomenal job over the last, they've always done a phenomenal job, but especially over the last few years, that COVID not only affected our families, it affected our communities and our educators. We were all in it together. And we have to, again, think about how we can work together and partner together, not only with our educators, our educator partners and all the different groups that they represent, but also with our community partners, of which we have a ton in the city of Cleveland, and we're very thankful for those partnerships.
Let me shift for last, and then we're going to start to ask the questions in the chat and really in the Q&A. But Elliot, I also think that health requires partners that are beyond schools, or maybe even school-based health folks. Can you talk about the health partnerships that really can ensure that you can improve attendance?
Sure, definitely. And that's, of course, aside from having a nurse in every single school and a social worker in every single school, right?
Well, I wonder if that is actually part of the partnership I'm thinking. There's both
Absolutely.
Partnerships in schools and partnerships outside schools. I mean, I know that you've sometimes, we've seen where people have an attendance team, but maybe the school nurses is not actually being leveraged for her insights on that attendance team.
That's right.
So there may be both. You feel free to speak to both within school and outside school partnerships.
Yeah, so I mean, in an ideal world, you really would have a school nurse in every school. You maybe even more. You would have a social worker in every school, maybe even more than one, depending on the size of the school. But you're absolutely right. If those individuals of that health team, and every school should really have a health team, if they're not talking to each other, if they're not coordinating care, then you're going to be duplicating services, you're going to be missing things, making errors, missing out on things. And so we need to make sure that the most important piece of this is that coordination piece. And if you can collaborate with health institutions, with the local health department, potentially to bring in some of those resources that you may not currently have in your district, that can really go a long ways to making sure that our kids get the care that they deserve. You can partner with local behavioral health institutions to bring in behavioral health services. Now with technology, you can use telemedicine to bring care to the school without actually having a provider on site, but you have a nurse who has the tools in front of her to be able to look into an ear or listen to a lungs, and a provider off-site is making a diagnosis and giving that child the treatment that they need. And, you know, the hard part for schools to put all these things in place is funding, right? And so there's a lot of work being done across states, across the country, to find ways to reimburse schools for the services that they're provided. Because if you can get that reimbursement, then you can help sustain some of those roles and positions in schools that are specific to health.
I want to ask one question I think is health related that's in the Q&A. Madeline James asks, are there communities that are collecting data on the number of young children who lost a parent or family member due to COVID? I'd be curious if any of you have been able to look at that and then how that might have helped you respond to the kind of trauma or other issues that are connected to that family that loss. This might be a question that, yeah, Elliot, did you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I haven't seen such that specific of data, but I do know that with many of the screenings that are out there for behavioral health, they ask about, you know, family loss or been affected by someone getting ill or sick in the family. And then that allows you to, you know, take the next step and dig a little bit deeper.
And then I want to, oh, go ahead, Tracy.
I'm
yes.
sorry. Yeah, I would think that, you know, I know that's a great question and we probably should look at that. But I think at the school level, because our school staff have those relationships with families, they often know when there's been a change in custody or caretaker in that family. So that would be some interesting data to gather and look at.
And then there's some questions about, and I think it was you, Tracy, who talked about the decrease in the number of kids participating in preschool programs during the pandemic. A question about why is it happening? Is that because it's considered voluntary? Is it because, you know, is there something about having, this person also talked about having pre-K full day and full year programs had better attendance than part-time, or working families will send their child and prefer a family, you know, a location closer to where it's full-time. Just curious about both. What do you see as the factors affecting attendance, and maybe from your experience in Cleveland?
Well, again, I think it goes back to this whole issue of trust. And with COVID, you know, we did see that disruption in terms of families, where we might have parents who prefer in-home care by a trusted family member, because they don't want their kids to go to school and be exposed to whatever is rolling out there. Now we have the trifecta of respiratory diseases. We've got RSV, we've got COVID and the flu. But we're starting to see an uptick again in terms of our preschool enrollment. I think one of the biggest issues is for working families who have a schedule, a very, you know, it's dictated by their employers, that sometimes the hours that we offer preschool do not match with their work hours. We do have full days preschool in many of our schools. We do have some half-day programs, and we tend to see that the enrollment is up better in the full-day programs where we offer free transportation.
Elena, yeah, what would you add to this, and in terms of what keeps families from getting to school, and whether or not you've been able to use your home visiting programs to help build connections, increase participation in preschool?
Yes, absolutely. I did see a question in the chat that talked about in states where kinder isn't mandatory, like how do you get parents to come? And my answer to that was pre-K. And so as a district, we have really amped up our efforts for pre-K participation. And so we offer full day for 4-year-olds, and we offer half day for 3-year-olds, and then even some full day for 3-year-olds. In addition to that, we partner with local childcares and Head Start to provide pre-K services, you know, offsite. And so that goes to families maybe not feeling comfortable going to what we call the big school, the elementary school. And so they'll go to the child care center where perhaps they have been since they were babies. And so they'll be able to continue there through pre-K until they come to school. Our home visiting really helps bridge that gap, especially with our HIPPY program, because that begins with kids as young as 2. And so our home instructors are able to build those relationships early, and then the kids will turn 3. And if the parent chooses, they can certainly enroll in our district for pre-K. But definitely by the time 4 comes, we're seeing that our children that's their new start of school at 4 years old. And to be quite honest, when I started teaching in the district 28 years ago, we didn't have pre-K in the system. And so it's definitely something that's newer. And I think it's a great benefit, not only to our families who can go to work and have their children in trusted care, but their kids can learn and just be in that school environment.
I'd like to turn to you for a moment, Erica, because I also know that you all have thought a lot about that pre-K to K transition. So both, how have you leveraged preschool to support attendance, and how would you respond to that issue of if kindergarten's not mandatory, how do you get families to show up to school?
So we've done a lot of work on our transition from pre-K into kindergarten, because a lot of people see them as very distinct, separate things. And so our preschool center, actually, we put our kids on a bus, and they go, the 4-year-olds, to their home school where they're going to go to kindergarten, and they spend a half a day with the kindergarten teachers and the students at the elementary school. The principal gives them a tour of the school. They get to do a PE class with a PE teacher. They get to eat in the big cafeteria with a partner 5th grade student. And so we try to get them captivated and embedded, even down to like the playground itself, in the home school that they'll be attending. And we do that at the kid level, so they're excited, but we also do it for the parents. We have home school parent nights for preschool parents who are about to enroll their kids into kindergarten. And that's a night where parents can go or sign on virtually and meet the principal, talk with the kindergarten teachers, meet some of the support staff, and answer any questions that they may have. As our preschool program is building itself, we have like 180 3 and 4-year-olds in one building, and with a wait list. The generations and the siblings that are coming and following are transitioning into kindergarten in a much more effective and efficient manner. And again, that's about just building relationships with families and getting them to trust you and your programming, and that you always have their child's interest at heart, and regardless of your actions and your decisions.
Are any of you working with community-based organizations to engage them so that you're not just using the preschool programs that are run or based on school sites, but are actually reaching out with CBO partners?
So our Family Resource Center, that's part of our preschool program, does work with the, I think there's 23 home providers in district, and 2 private, one's at a church and one's a private preschool organization. And they do professional development and supports and sort of like monthly meetings with those providers. We also have play groups, which are for children who are under 2.9 years old, to get families who are new, who may not have experienced school or have been in a preschool setting, play group once a week where they can bring their children to socialize with other children from the community, and just talk to them about our programming, get them in our building. We have a designated space for it, see if they need any support. So we're really trying to put some cohesion between our preschool program, our regular K-12 programming, our Family Resource Center, and making those connections with our providers.
I'm going to shift to a totally other topic. There is a question about data on kids who walk to school versus those receiving transportation. are walkers more likely to miss days in the winter? And then she talked about having tried a walking school bus. I will say, by the way, there is some research that shows providing transportation actually improves kids' attendance. That's like national research. It was done, I think, with Michael Gottfried looking at data. So there is some evidence, but what do you know locally about this issue of walk versus transportation and improving attendance?
Well, we do know that when we do have inclement weather, that our attendance does drop. So that's a no-brainer. A lot of our students are transported to school, but we do have many that do walk to school. So we have worked with the city of Cleveland with a program called Safe Routes to School, where we do the walking school buses as well, have the crossing guards. And then some of our parents at schools have actually created their own walking school buses and worked with neighbors with the neighborhood watch, where people know what time kids are walking to school, and they're actually out in the community, the barbershops and everyone, just saying, we're here for you. Again, with our attendance campaign, sending those posters and flyers out to our partners to display in their barbershops and stores and even on the RTA buses. But I do think that there is a correlation between poor weather and attendance. And again, that's just taking the time to look at that data and pull through it.
So another question is, it's from Alan Gutman. I understand that most interventions causes for absenteeism will be family-focused, family-based. But do any of you conduct analyses that look inward and examine what school factors may be affecting attendance, quality of curriculum, staffing, learning environment issues? And Elaine, it looks like you're ready to jump in here.
Yes. And so, we gather information a variety of ways, but one of them is through the hotline. And so we can always know, like, if something is going on in a certain school or a certain neighborhood, just based on the reports that are coming in from parents. And so if we are getting reports that, my child is bored in school, or, a lot of those, and then we do look inward and we do think, okay, so how else can we engage? Are we challenging students properly and adequately in order for them to want to stay in school? The other thing that comes to mind is just health and safety of the school. Many times students will not want to come to school because they're nervous, they have anxiety, and they just they'd rather not be in the school environment. And so if we're getting a lot of bullying allegations or just the child feeling uncomfortable, that is when we as a district can go to campus leadership and just let them know, here are the concerns that we're hearing. We'd like for you all to, look at your systems to see where we can improve. Because again, the goal is, that we are this safe, warm, welcoming environment for kids to come to school.
Yeah, in our district, we actually conduct a survey. It's called Conditions for Learning Survey, which takes a look at how students are feeling in the building, whether they feel safe in the building, whether they feel like their peers are bullying, if they feel safe outside of the school. And again, using that data to inform, what types of programs and supports are in the school. As with many districts, we do actually focus a lot on SEL. So we actually have a department, it's called Humanware. And all of our, as I said, we have training in trauma-informed practice, restorative practice, and then also helping our teachers to integrate SEL strategies into their classroom during the day. It's not an add-on, it's not separate. It really does have to be integrated so that it just becomes part and parcel of how you create a safe zone for your students. We also have, not on our watch, students who are mediators in our schools, who mediate situations between students. And then we use a variety of different types of SEL curriculums to address those social emotional factors, which can sometimes interfere with a child feeling comfortable in attending school.
Hetty, can I just add to something that Tracy just shared?
Mm-hmm.
So Tracy brought up a really important piece about data. If you don't know, and I'm going to go back to health on this data piece, but if you don't know the health issues that your student body is facing, then how do you work towards addressing them? So districts should really, and schools should really have a strong data system in place that can tell you how many kids do you have with asthma, how many kids do you have with diabetes, how many kids do you have with seizures, and not only that, which of those kids has an action plan on file, permission to carry medication, their rescue inhaler on file, and then to take it to the next level, making sure that need to know individuals have access to that data. So that that care can be coordinated. And that's not just within the school, but even outside the school. In DC, they're doing some really amazing work at National Children's where they're sharing chronic absenteeism data with health providers so that health providers can then work with the school and the family to get the family the necessary supports that they need. And so we really need to take this work to the next level, and getting that data is so key to this work. And even when you mentioned the transportation and walking, if it's cold outside and a child has asthma and they walk outside and their asthma gets set off, then they're just going to go right back home, right? So do we know which of those walkers has asthma? Do we know which of those walkers has specific health issue so that we can make sure that they have the necessary supports to get them to school healthy? So just things to keep in mind as we continue this conversation.
One person in the chat asks, says, what is a task a school can start with to increase attendance other than the givens? Forge strong connections, reach out to families for wellness checks. They're saying they're already doing these and their attendance is still struggling, particularly among their kindergarten and fifth graders. And I'm actually going to take quite a little role outside of moderator role, offer up an idea, and also then offer up for you all to say what might be that one strategy. One of the things I keep thinking is that what gets kids to come to school is to have really engage in that joy of learning. And one of the things we often don't use, speaking to your point about data, Elliot, we could also be using data to help inform who do we connect with the most exciting expanded learning and summer learning programs, which are that make kids feel confident and comfortable about learning. And if they're offered on a school site, they might also help to increase their connection to that school site, increase their sense of connection to teachers, depending on who's helping to do it. And often I see that those expanded learning opportunities are first come, first serve. They're not necessarily targeting the kids who most need that extra learning support. So that's another thing that's beyond the typical givens that I would offer up. Anyone else here, aside from the forge connections, reach out to families for wellness checks, what's something that a school could do?
I would like to offer up just really studying the trends in the data of why kids are absent. It kind of goes to, building those relationships with parents, but it really speaks to if a particular school campus has a high level of absences on a Monday or a Friday, and we already know that, then maybe we're planning different things on those days so kids can be totally engaged and just want to come to school. Like, there's no way I'm missing today, Mom. I have to be at school. Or it could lead to other things, like maybe there is something going on in the community that's causing kids to either to be late to school or just not show up at all. So just understanding those, individual campuses can make better decisions that way to really help support their particular groups that they serve. I've seen schools that maybe shift their reading block. Maybe they'll start out with a longer SEL piece, and then they'll shift their reading block until maybe 45 minutes after school starts, because they know now everyone is present and everyone's not going to miss the instruction that goes on.
And Elena, it feels like it's a combination of data, knowing where it is, and then talking to families about what the issue is. I remember I was in Phoenix recently, and in Avondale School District, they had forged a partnership with the public housing. And what they found is when they reopened a housing complex, they didn't have room for 2 buses. They only had room for 1 bus. So all these kids weren't making it to school. All they had to do was extend the curb so 2 buses could park.
Yeah.
Sometimes the issue is not the issue we think it is. It's another issue.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm getting at. And it'll make us be a little more innovative as we think about solutions to the perceived problems.
Sometimes I think the strategy, Hetty, is actually asking more questions.
Yeah.
Have the 5th grade class Did they have the highest absenteeism rate as kindergartners, first, second, third, fourth, fifth? Are kindergarten and fifth grade always the 2 grade levels that have the highest level of absences? There are some simple but very deep questions that you can ask there that may be strategies themselves.
And I would just interject here, ask the kids, sometimes just going directly to the source and saying, what is it that we can do? What is it that we can change? What would you like to see in our school? Getting their opinions and their input.
Thank you so much. I think there is a poll showing up. I'm trying to figure out, Becky, if I should be turning back to you for these final moments.
We still have a couple minutes. We would just like everybody to move the poll out of the view of the speakers, and we would love to have everybody's reaction to the poll. Hetty, we have a couple minutes and I'll pop back on then.
Okay, well, there is another question. More than one question, but one that you might, how do you feel about incentivizing parents and students for showing up to school?
I'll start that. I was a principal, and so I am an advocate for doing whatever it takes to get parents in the door, to build the trust. And then, of course, we are all working toward developing an internal motivation for being at school. But I'm just a personal believer in incentivizing those things. And if we're incentivizing, let's make it something that can be helpful for the families. So I saw in the chat maybe a Walmart gift card or a gift card somewhere that they can buy something for their family needs would be super helpful.
Anything else, Tracy? I know Cleveland does a ton of incentives in different kinds of ways. Any lessons learned about incentivizing?
Yeah, I mean, they have to be incentives that people want. Again, I think we go back to what will people work for? So finding out, asking those questions, surveying parents, surveying students, and finding out what they want. You know, and some of the activities in our attendance campaign, you know, we give out, and we don't give out perfect attendance awards. We like most improved. And we do pizza parties, and Arby's is one of our partners, and they'll come in and you know, have a classroom party for students. With parents, you know, this year, as I was talking to Lori, I said, you know, we often incentivize the students. Why don't we incentivize parents as well? And, you know, sending home those positive messaging or a certificate or a gift card of some sort. I think just saying to parents, we appreciate you. We appreciate what you're going through. We appreciate that it might be a struggle, but we're here for you. We're with you, and showing that appreciation, even if it's a certificate of some sort, or you know, something that I find often with parents is that if it's something that their kid made for them, you know, like a card or a picture, those things really touch the heart. So not only incentivizing those students who are making improvements, but parents as well.
You know, I also thought about another incentive, which is for our staff, who, as you all have said, have done yeoman's work so much to keep our kids connected, to keep kids learning. But one thing I've seen before is folk give staff awards. Who's the person who made me most want to come to school, who made me most feel connected, and finding ways to value and treasure the staff who make such a true difference. With that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Becky.
Well, thank you, Hetty. Thanks for such a stimulating conversation. As you can see in the chat, everybody has really appreciated this. Tracy, Elliot, Elena, Erica, thank you so much for making time to join us today. And to our ASL interpreters, Andy and Lisa, thank you. Also, thanks to Sierra and Evan behind the scenes, who made sure the slides were advanced. We really appreciate it. As you can see, these are our upcoming webinars. We would love to have you join us on another one. We have some great ones that will be coming up, and appreciate you all making the time to be here with us today. So thank you so much to Attendance Works as well for being such an extraordinary partner for over a decade now. So have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.